Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my video installment on utilitarianism. In the discussion today, we're going to continue to analyze John Stuart Mill's account of utilitarianism and the GHP, that's the greatest happiness principle. And we'll further look into some of the objections that he answers to his system of morality. And it's always good practice that when proposing a theory, when proposing a new concept such as utilitarianism, it's good practice to anticipate objections that might be launched towards your theory. And he does this, and he addresses, I think rather forcefully, some of the best objections to the principle of utility. So with that being said, we're going to begin our lecture on utilitarianism. All right. The first thing to know is, according to John Stuart Mill, the GHP, which we discussed from before, GHP, which is the moral law, and this stands for the greatest happiness the greatest happiness principle. So the GHP, moral law, the greatest happiness principle, is the law for the moral law which governs action for John Stuart Mill's account. And the question then is that the statement rather is that the GHP applies to the greatest happiness of all moral agents, and it doesn't apply specifically to the particular happiness or the agent's own happiness. So that when we talk about the GHP, this is the collective happiness. It can be understood in terms of collectives. The GHP refers to collective happiness. It does not refer to individual happiness. So that the greatest happiness principle is a moral law. It's the moral law for utilitarian ethic. And this law refers to collective happiness, the happiness aggregated, right? A collection of everyone's happiness, if that were to be able to be quantified, that number, that amount of happiness. And it does not pertain to individual happiness. So the first thing then to realize that an objector might say against utilitarian ethic is that the individual is left out, right? It's not an ethic that appeals to individual people. It appeals more to the collective happiness. And it is true. John Stuart Mill himself, in his early 20s, had a serious breakdown because of other things. He realized that the system that he spent his life perfecting didn't take into account his own personal happiness, right? So that he could be miserable, and all of his actions and all of his contributions could still make him miserable, but it would be better for him to continue within that sort of miserable lifestyle if his actions contributed to the collective happiness of others. And he wanted to make amends for that. And there are different ways to amend this. There's different versions of utilitarianism that attempt to address exactly this point, but we're not going to get into that discussion today. It's just important to understand that with respect to the system itself, the greatest happiness principle speaks to collective happiness more so than it does to individual happiness. Okay, the next thing to discuss is that the standard of morality, when we ask about the standard, what is the standard of morality? That which all actions are sort of referenced against. What is the standard of morality? The standard is, and this is a quote from John Stuart Mill, the rules and precepts for human conduct. So that the standard of morality and the key word here being the standard, that which actions are measured against, the standard of morality, are the rules and precepts for human conduct. So the standard of morality govern The standard of morality governs conduct. Specifically, the GHP, the greatest happiness principle, is put into place to govern human conduct. And the way that you can think about this is if I have my standard, right, the GHP, and I have my particular moral agent, agent A, the GHP is going to tell me what actions I need to do in order to conform to the system, right? In order to conform to the system. If my action conforms to the standard, if my action conforms to the standard, then my action is moral, right? If what I do conforms to what I have been instructed to do, then my action is moral. If my action does not conform, right? Conversely, if my action does not conform to the system says to do A, and I do A, the action is moral. If the system says to do A, and I do not A, well, my action is immoral, right? So I have to be able to conform to the system, right? This system, this standard in place is there to govern action. And this is how ethics of all sorts work, whether it be a deontological ethic, a utilitarian ethic, a virtue ethic. All ethics function on that same general principle, right? That the standard of morality is in place to govern agent action. Those actions that conform to the standard are moral. Those actions that do not conform to the standard are immoral. All right. The next point to discuss in our analysis of Mill is that happiness cannot be defined in terms of continuous pleasure, right? He anticipates that an objector might say that, listen, all that utilitarians are concerned with is maximizing pleasure, which is true, and that the only claim is that all that you're concerned with is maximizing pleasure, right? You lose sort of this contact with individual human beings and their desire and their wills because you're so concerned with maximizing your own pleasure, right, and your own happiness. And this is important to understand. As we said earlier, the first wave of responses that John Stuart Mill gives to this critique initially is to say that that's a misrepresentation of utilitarianism, because the system is not saying that you should be concerned, or the system governs concern for individual happiness, but that the system, the GHP, speaks to maximizing collective happiness, right? The happiness of individuals in general. And this is important. This is an important claim. He said that there are two constituents of a satisfied life. Remember, we talked about satisfaction in the last video, and we tried to see what satisfaction was, and we saw that satisfaction was inevitably related to and corresponded with conforming to the rules of the GHP. Just look at, I think it was video 3 or 4, that satisfaction, according to this system, equals conforming to the greatest happiness principle, right? We saw that in the last section. Well, what Mill does now is he talks about constituent parts of satisfaction, the elements that make up a satisfied life. So these would be the elements that he talks about. These are two elements for a satisfied life.